Night. Wind moving through torn Persian banners. Fire snapping low against the dark. Somewhere beyond the camp, horses refuse to sleep. They smell blood before men do. In the center of the silence, beneath torchlight and bronze, the body of Cyrus the Great lies motionless on a bed of shields. The man who broke kingdoms. The man who walked into Babylon without burning it. The man whose name had already become larger than the empire he built was dead. No drums. No victory songs. No priests speaking to the gods. Only blood drying on iron. And soldiers staring at the ground, too afraid to lift their eyes. Because in that moment, no one was mourning a king. They were wondering what would happen when his son took his place. Ancient sources place Cyrus's death somewhere on the empire's eastern frontier, around 500 and 3529 BC, deep in campaign, far from the cities he had conquered. His body came back wrapped in silence. His legend did not. Cambyses II took the throne almost immediately, and that was when the camp changed. Veteran officers stopped speaking above whispers. Servants moved faster. Even the horses grew restless, because Cambyses did not kneel beside his father. He did not touch the body. He did not pray. He did not cry. He just stood there, young, still, unreadable, staring west, toward the deserts, toward the land of pharaohs, toward ancient Egypt. Then, without taking his eyes off the horizon, he spoke 7 words that men would remember long after their bones turned to dust. Babylon belonged to my father. Egypt belongs to me. And that was the night Persia stopped burying its dead and started hunting gods, and far to the west. Beyond the mountains, beyond the rivers, beyond the reach of kings who thought Persia had already taken enough. Another empire was still breathing. Ancient Egypt, a land older than memory, a land where stone rose higher than pride. Under the burning sun, the pyramids stood like blades pushed into the sky. Their shadows stretched across the desert like the fingers of dead kings refusing to let go. Along the banks of the Nile, temples burned with oil and incense. Priests in linen robes walked through columns of carved stone, their voices rising through the dark like something that did not belong to the living. Deep beneath the temples, the bodies still slept, wrapped in gold, wrapped in resin, wrapped in centuries. The smell of cedar oil, hot stone, and preserved flesh clung to the air so thick it never truly left. This was not just a kingdom. This was a civilization that had already buried more dynasties than Persia had conquered. And on the throne sat Psamtik III, young, proud, born into a crown older than almost every empire on earth. His generals still believed no foreign king could hold Egypt. His priests still believed their gods guarded the Nile. His people still believed the desert itself would do the killing before any enemy ever reached their walls. And maybe that belief had protected them for centuries, because armies had crossed mountains. Armies had crossed rivers, crossed kingdoms, but the sand had buried all of them. And across Egypt, from temple to palace, from soldier to priest, one truth was spoken like law. If Persia comes, the desert will eat them first. But the desert didn't kill them. That was Egypt's first mistake. When Cambyses II left the eastern frontier in 525 BC, he did not march toward cities. He marched toward sand, toward the Sinai Peninsula, toward the place that had already buried armies, merchants, kings, and anyone arrogant enough to believe water would last forever. By the 3rd day, men stopped talking. 5th, lips split open, tongues swelled. Armor burned against skin so hot. Some soldiers tore bronze from their own bodies with bleeding hands. Horses collapsed first, then camels, their legs folded without warning, their mouths foaming, their bodies sinking slowly into sand that still held the heat of yesterday's sun. Some men tried to drink from leather skins that were already empty. Some cut open dead animals, hoping to find water inside. Some never stood up again. Ancient accounts suggest Arab allies helped the Persian advance across the desert, supplying water and guiding them through terrain that should have killed them. Not luck, preparation, discipline, survival bought before the march even began. And Cambyses never slowed down. While men bled from cracked skin and marched with blood dried across their teeth, he kept moving west. No speeches, no promises, no mercy for those who fell behind. At night, the wind covered the dead before sunrise ever touched them. New graves, new names, just armor, disappearing beneath sand. Then, after days of heat, blood, and silence, Egyptian scouts rode back to the Nile with faces drained of color. Because the impossible had happened. Persia had crossed the desert, and Persia was coming. And when the scouts reached the Nile, they weren't running anymore. They were falling off their horses, armor cracked, faces white with dust, eyes wide open, like they had seen gods die. By sunrise, outside Pelusium, the ground began to shake. Not thunder, hooves, thousands of them. Then the sky vanished. Arrows, so many that daylight disappeared behind them. Egyptian shields rose and shattered. The first Persian impact broke the front line in seconds. Spears punched through bronze. Horses crashed through bodies. Men disappeared under their own ranks before they could even scream. Some tried to reach the Nile River. They never made it. By midday, the riverbanks weren't mud anymore. They were red. Ancient stories written centuries later claim Cambyses II may have used sacred animals, especially cats, to break Egyptian morale. Historians still debate that story, but nobody debates what came next. Because somewhere behind the collapsing line, Psamtik III stopped giving orders, stopped shouting, stopped believing, and for the first time in thousands of years, Egypt backed away. When Psamtik III broke from the battlefield, he didn't retreat alone. What was left of Egypt ran with him. Chariots without wheels, horsemen without horses, infantry dragging broken shields through blood and sand. Hours earlier, they had marched out believing the eastern frontier would hold. By sunset, half of them were dead. The rest were running for Memphis. Behind them, Cambyses II didn't stop to bury the dead. Didn't stop to count the bodies, didn't even stop to celebrate. He ordered the advance. Immediately, Persian cavalry moved first. Fast, wide, cutting off roads leading north. Archers followed. Then the infantry, shield to shield, step by step. No gaps, no hesitation. By the time the Egyptian survivors reached Memphis, Persian scouts were already in sight. The gates opened just long enough to pull the last soldiers inside. Then the city sealed itself. But Memphis was no longer preparing for war. Memphis was buying time. Cambyses knew it. So he did what his father had done to kings before him. He refused to wait. Siege towers moved forward. Archers darkened the walls. Battering crews drove iron into the gates until the hinges began to split. Inside the city, commanders screamed for men to hold formation. Some obeyed. Some threw down weapons and ran. By the time the outer defense collapsed, Psamtik III was still alive. But his kingdom was already finished. Memphis had fallen. Egypt was on its knees. And that should have been enough. For any king, not for Cambyses II. Because somewhere beyond the western sands, the priests of Siwa Oasis still refused to speak his name. So Cambyses sent 50,000 men, and that was the last mistake they ever made. According to accounts from Herodotus, the army marched west for days. By the 8th day, lips were splitting open. By the 9th, horses were dropping in the sand. By the 10th, men stopped talking, not from discipline, from fear, because something was wrong. No birds, no insects, no wind, 50,000 soldiers, and the desert had gone silent. Then one scout pointed at the horizon. At first, it looked like smoke. Then, it blocked the sun. Officers screamed for shields. Cavalry tried to turn back. Too late. The storm hit like a wall. Sand tore flesh. Men disappeared while still standing. Brothers lost each other at arm's length. Commanders screamed orders until their mouths filled with dust. Standards vanished. Camels vanished. Entire ranks vanished. And when the storm finally passed, there was no army, no camp, no tracks, no graves, nothing. Modern historians still debate what really happened, but one story refused to die. Cambyses II conquered kingdoms, and then watched 50,000 of his own men disappear, like they had never existed. Cambyses II had done what even his father never did. Babylon, Egypt, 2 kingdoms, 2 worlds, both broken beneath Persia from the outside. The Achaemenid Persian Empire looked untouchable, bigger than ever, richer than ever, more feared than ever, and that was exactly when it started to bleed. In 522 BC, somewhere on the road through Syria, Cambyses never reached home. No army attacked him. No city rebelled. No enemy stood in his path. And yet, the king of Persia died anyway. Some said his own blade. Some said madness. Some said fate had finally caught him. History never agreed. But Persia didn't have time to mourn, because before Cambyses' body was even cold, someone else was already claiming the throne. Babylon fell to water. Egypt fell to sand. But Persia's next enemy was already inside the palace.